Before we begin, I want you to imagine the walls around you, the ones that feel safe, steady, familiar. Now imagine discovering those same walls were built on lies. This story isn't just about betrayal. It's about how truth reveals itself when everything else burns away. It's about the courage it takes to protect what you love when the people closest to you become the danger. This is the story of Renee and Nia Ellis, a mother and daughter who faced the unthinkable and turned survival into strength. Their journey reminds us that the end of something broken can be the beginning of something unshakable. If you're watching this, stay until the end, because what starts as tragedy becomes transformation. And you'll want to see how light finds its way back through smoke. Before we dive in, take a second to like this video if you believe every survivor deserves their voice. Share it with someone who's learning to rebuild. And subscribe to Revenge Tales by Camera for more powerful stories of courage, justice, and rebirth. Now, let's step inside Blueprint Rising and see what happens when truth refuses to die in the fire. The Ellis home in Crescent Hills sat on a quiet curve of a tree-lined street, a brick house that caught the morning light just right. From the outside, it looked peaceful, like the kind of place where laughter lived. Inside, though, silence carried more weight than words. I'm Renee Ellis, 37 years old, mother to a curious 6-year-old girl named Nia. That morning, I stood at the kitchen counter, pouring orange juice into a glass, while the floor above me creaked under the rhythm of small feet. Some people hear those sounds and think of age. I hear them and think of roots, proof that the house has a heartbeat. Mommy, the clouds are making elephants again. Nia called from the living room window, her little palms pressed to the glass. She always saw shapes in things I never noticed, stories in every shadow. Eat your waffles before they get cold, baby, I said with a smile, sliding her plate across the table. Breakfasts in our home always looked picture-perfect, golden waffles, sunlight on the walls. But lately, something in the air felt off. My husband, Malcolm, came down the stairs buttoning his charcoal gray shirt, smelling of aftershave and quiet distance. He was 41, tall and careful, a man who seemed built to impress boardrooms and neighbors alike. He kissed Nia's cheek and said, "I've got a major pitch this weekend. If it lands, it could change everything for us. I'll bring you something special, okay?" Nia grinned, but I just nodded. His tone had a strain I couldn't ignore. Malcolm hadn't been himself for months, not since my father passed and left me with a sizable inheritance. I was still grieving, but his restlessness had sharpened into something colder, something I couldn't name. Adding to the tension was Loretta Ellis, my mother-in-law. Elegant on the surface, controlling underneath. She called almost every evening, reminding me she'd stop by soon. Her voice dipped in honey, but heavy with judgment. She'd never seen me as enough for her son, too ordinary, too emotional. That morning, I tried to focus on Nia's giggles instead of the shadows in the room. Malcolm left early for work, and I turned my attention to what I could control, my project for the Crescent City Museum of Design, where I was curating an exhibition on Black women architects who reshaped the South after Reconstruction. It was my dream project, one I'd fought to make real. The work steadied me. The details, the research, it helped me breathe again. But even as I lost myself in blueprints and artist notes, unease lingered in the corners of the house. Nia often wandered into my study while I worked. One afternoon, she held up an old photograph from a box I hadn't touched in years. "Mommy, is this Grandpa?" she asked. I looked down at the faded image, me as a child, standing beside my father, both of us smiling under a magnolia tree. My chest tightened. "Yes, baby. That's Grandpa, when I was your age." She nodded slowly. Then she whispered, "He talks to me sometimes. He says you need to be careful." I laughed it off gently, brushing her curls behind her ear. You and that wild imagination. But inside, something in me froze. Children dream in ways adults can't. Still, her words echoed in my mind all evening. And when Nia later said she'd seen her daddy whispering on the phone with Grandma Loretta, her small voice trembling as she added, "He said you won't notice," a strange fear began to root itself deep inside me. I told myself it was nothing, grown-up worries crossing into a child's world. But that night, as the house fell quiet and the wind shifted through the pines, I couldn't sleep. Something about the rhythm of our days had changed. And I could feel it, the sense that a storm was waiting, patient and deliberate, just beyond the walls of our home. The weeks slid by in a blur of emails, loan models, and late-night note cards for the exhibit. I kept telling myself that routine is its own kind of armor. If I stacked enough ordinary moments, school drop-offs, grocery lists, wall labels for the museum, maybe the uneasy feeling would run out of places to hide. One afternoon, Nia padded into my study in socked feet and climbed into my lap. "Mommy, why does Daddy talk to Grandma with the door closed?" she asked, almost casual, the way kids test the surface of a lake with a toe. "Grown-up things," I said. "Work. Timing. You know how adults are." She nodded, but her brow stayed pinched. "He said, she won't notice," she whispered. "I don't like when he says that." The words landed like a pin in my chest. I smoothed her hair and let the silence answer for me. That night, after Malcolm said goodnight and disappeared upstairs, I passed his office, the one he kept just for calls, the one I rarely entered. The door wasn't fully closed. The desk was too neat, like a picture in a brochure. A stack of folders sat aligned with military precision. I told myself to keep walking. I didn't. Inside, a manila folder peered from a drawer left slightly ajar. Executive Contingency, R. Ellis was stamped on the tab in blunt block letters. My stomach dropped. I slid it open with shaking hands. It wasn't life insurance. It was colder than that. A key person policy tied to a shell company I didn't recognize and a spousal waiver, drafted months after my father's funeral. There were also emails printed out. Who prints emails? Between Malcolm and someone named V. Crane, discussing timelines, asset mobility, and a line that turned my mouth dry. Once we trigger the safety sequence, we control the narrative. I put everything back exactly how I'd found it, then stood in the dark office with my heart drumming in my ears. Safety sequence. Narrative. The words sounded like an instruction manual for disaster. The next day at the Crescent City Museum, I buried myself in work. I cataloged models by two sisters who had redesigned storm shelters across the deep South a century ago, quiet geniuses who'd left blueprints in county archives instead of textbooks. During lunch, I pulled up the original architectural file on our own house. The Ellis home had been modified in the 1970s by a railroad engineer who installed a narrow service corridor to access plumbing without tearing up floors. A note in the margin read, "Pantry hatch, south wall, emergency access." I stared at that line for a long time. Back home, I checked the pantry wall when Nia was building block towers in the den. Not the shelves. The wall behind them. When I pressed my palm against the lower panel, I felt a hollow echo, like tapping a drum. My scalp prickled. I didn't pry it open. Not yet. But I measured how low it sat, how a child could fit, how far it might go. That evening, Malcolm came home with the brightness he wears like a suit. He kissed Nia, poured himself sparkling water, and leaned against the counter as if he had always belonged there. "Last thing before the big weekend," he said. "I'll be in Midtown overnight. Strategy workshop." "Which hotel?" I asked, light as sugar. "Why?" He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You planning to crash it?" "Just curious." He named a place I knew he hated. The lie was small, but it was still a lie. When he left with an overnight bag, the house exhaled. I tucked Nia into my bed instead of hers. She curled under my arm with her stuffed rabbit and asked, "Can we leave the lamp on?" "Of course." Around midnight, a thread of sound stitched itself through the quiet, a low mechanical hum I'd never noticed before. The heater wasn't running. The fridge was silent. The noise was under everything, like a thought you can't shake. I slipped out of bed and checked the back door. It was locked. I tried the side door. Locked. I turned the deadbolt on the front door and felt it resist. The smart lock's ring glowed, then clicked back on its own. A cold feather ran down my spine. I grabbed my phone and opened the Home app. A new security profile had appeared, labeled Safe Mode, Automation. I tried to switch it off. The toggle slid and then slid back. The app flashed, protected by remote administrator. My breath fogged in the hallway. I moved to the kitchen to try a window. Before I could lift the latch, sleek metal shutters unrolled from the casings with a smooth electric whine, one after another, sealing the glass like a closing eye. The house went from night to contained. From upstairs, Nia's small voice. "Mommy?" I forced my own to be steady. "I'm here, baby." That's when I smelled it. Faint at first, like a match snuffed too late. Not smoke. Gas. The hum in the walls deepened, a whisper turning into a vow. I ran to the utility closet. The digital meter that controls our lines blinked a code I'd never seen. I reached for the manual valve and found a tamper bar screwed across it, clean and new and cruelly tight. Nia stood in the doorway, rabbit clutched to her chest. Her eyes were wide but clear. "Mommy, we have to go where you showed me on the paper." "What paper?" "The one with the picture lines," she said, miming little squares, the blueprints. "The Heidi place." I dropped to one knee, met her eyes, and let every ounce of panic dissolve into purpose. "Okay," I said. "Shoes on. Fast." We moved through the kitchen like we were born for this, not slamming, not stumbling. I yanked the lower pantry shelf aside, pressed the panel, and felt the seam give under my fingers. It lifted with a dry wooden sigh. Cool air breathed out from the dark. I helped Nia lower herself in, then slid after her, pulling the panel back into place. The corridor was tight as a fist and smelled like dust and old rain. Above us, the house hummed and clicked, a machine pretending to be a home. "Hands on the wall," I whispered. "We'll shuffle, not crawl. Count your steps." 1, 2, 3, Nia whispered, the sound of her courage small and fierce in the tunnel. Behind us, a relay snapped. Somewhere a valve turned. The air thickened, sweet, heavy wrong. I squeezed Nia's fingers and kept moving. Somewhere ahead, faint and far, a seam of night waited where would become's world. I aimed us at it like a prayer, knowing two things and two things only. Someone had engineered this, and I was going to get my daughter out. The passage felt endless. Every few feet, dust fell into my hair and Nia's whisper counted the steps between breaths. 21, 22. Her tiny voice kept me grounded, the only rhythm cutting through the noise of my own pulse. The tunnel tilted slightly downward, the air cooler the deeper we went. When I reached forward, my palm brushed cold metal, a door latch crusted with rust. I shoved it once, twice. It groaned open like it hadn't been touched in 50 years. A gust of night air burst through, sharp and clean. We crawled out into the garden shed, knees hitting old tools and bags of soil. When I lifted Nia into my arms, her curls caught faint orange light. I turned. Our house, our perfect, peaceful home, was glowing from the inside like a lantern about to explode. Flames licked the windows, and a roar followed, not loud at first, but growing. The air around us shook. I could see the shutters bending under the heat. I clutched Nia tighter. "We run. Now." We sprinted barefoot across the backyard. Every breath burned. Behind us, glass shattered, and the roof began to fold in on itself. A column of black smoke twisted into the Georgia sky, blotting out the moon. By the time we reached the front of Mrs. Franklin's house, our elderly neighbor 2 doors down, sirens were already howling in the distance. I banged on her door with the side of my fist, shouting, "Please, help, call 911. The door swung open, and Mrs. Franklin, still in her floral nightgown, stared at us, eyes wide. I barely recognized my own voice when I said, "Malcolm, he locked us inside. He tried to kill us." She didn't ask questions. She pulled us inside, trembling hands already dialing. "Lord have mercy," she murmured as her living room filled with the glow of the fire outside. When the firefighters arrived, our home was nothing but flame and noise. The beams collapsed, hissing into embers. Reporters appeared before dawn. I sat on Mrs. Franklin's porch steps, wrapped in a blanket, Nia's head on my lap. Detective Leroy Tanner, A broad-shouldered man with tired eyes crouched beside me. "Ma'am," he said gently, "I have to ask, are you certain your husband did this?" I nodded, my throat raw. He planned it. The locks, the gas lines, the security system, he called it safe mode. "Check his files, check his desk." He studied my face for a moment, then gestured to a young officer. "Bag everything near the service entry once it's cool enough." Nia lifted her head, voice trembling but steady. He talked on the phone with Grandma Loretta. He said if Mommy was gone, everything would be his. Tanner's pen froze over his notepad. "You heard that yourself?" She nodded solemnly. 3 days ago. Daddy said the house would take care of it." That sentence landed like a stone in the air between us. By morning, the investigators had found what I feared: gas residue in every room, valves locked with brand new tamper bars, the smart security system overridden from an external device. The news called it a domestic arson case under corporate suspicion. To me, it was the night I realized I'd been living with a man who saw me as an obstacle. 2 days later, Malcolm was found at a rest stop off I-85, sitting in his Tesla, suitcase packed with cash, burner phones, and 2 fake IDs. When the officers approached, he tried to smile his way through the arrest. "You've got the wrong man," he said. But the truth was already out. When they questioned him, he cracked within hours. He said the whole thing was Loretta's idea, that she'd told him I was ruining his legacy. He claimed he didn't know the gas would ignite that fast, that he only wanted to scare me into handing over the inheritance. But when they brought Loretta in, her mask slipped fast. She slammed her palm on the interrogation table, eyes blazing. "I built that family name," she spat. "She came along and poisoned it. I told him to reclaim what was his." It wasn't grief that made me tremble when I heard that. It was the clarity that comes when fear burns away. Everything I'd ignored, his distance, her comments, the hollow tone in his promises, had been the quiet prelude to a plan. And Nia, she had heard the truth before I ever did. I held her close that night in the motel room the police arranged for us, her little body finally heavy with sleep. The world outside smelled faintly of smoke, but we were breathing. For the first time since that whisper through the floorboards, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I wasn't going to be their victim. Not ever again. 3 months later, I found myself sitting on a wooden bench inside the Fulton County Courthouse, the kind of place where the air hums with gossip and judgment. Nia swung her legs beside me, clutching her rabbit, while cameras flashed outside the courtroom doors. Everyone wanted to see the Crescent Hills fire case. Malcolm looked smaller when the guards brought him in, like the shine had finally rubbed off. Loretta followed, her pearls gone, her hair flat against her head. They both avoided my eyes. The prosecutor, Assistant DA Clarissa Moore, stood tall and calm, the kind of black woman who made every word sound like truth carved in stone. She began by laying out the evidence one piece at a time, each one a nail. There were photos of the tampered gas lines, reports confirming remote overrides of the locks, and digital logs showing Malcolm's phone had triggered the house's safe mode at 12:47 a.m., the exact moment Nia and I had been trapped inside. Clarissa pointed toward a screen showing the printed emails I'd found, messages between Malcolm and V. Crane, referencing activation sequences and public sympathy narratives. She looked at the jury and said, "This was not an accident. It was an investment, an attempted murder masked as strategy." Malcolm's attorney tried to paint me as hysterical. He called me grieving, paranoid, and unstable since her father's death. But Clarissa sliced through that easily. "If instability means surviving a gas-fueled explosion engineered by your husband," she said coolly, "then every woman in Georgia better pray to be that unstable." When the defense shifted tactics, Malcolm broke. On the stand, he pointed at his mother. "It was her plan. She told me Renee was going to ruin me. She said we could start fresh once the estate cleared." Loretta shot up from her seat, her voice sharp enough to slice through the air. "Don't you dare lie on me, Malcolm. You begged me for help. You said you were drowning. I only told you to think smart." The room rippled with gasps. Even her own lawyer buried his face in his hands. But nothing prepared me for what came next when Clarissa called Nia to testify. My stomach twisted. My baby was 6, too young for a witness stand. But Nia insisted. She walked up clutching her rabbit, the same one that had survived the fire with us. The bailiff leaned down gently. "Do you promise to tell the truth?" "Yes, sir," she said softly. Clarissa knelt beside her. "Can you tell us what you heard, sweetheart?" Nia looked toward Malcolm. Her little voice didn't shake. "Daddy told Grandma on the phone that if Mommy was gone, everything would be his. He said the house would do it, so it looked like a mistake." The room went silent. No coughs. No papers. Just the sound of that small voice cutting through years of pretense. Clarissa asked, "And when you say Grandma, do you mean your daddy's mom or your mommy's dad's wife?" Nia pointed to Loretta. "His mom. She always said Mommy didn't belong." Loretta's face crumpled. Just slightly. Not guilt, embarrassment. Like the mask she'd worn for decades had cracked under the light. When Nia stepped down, I pulled her into my lap and whispered, "You were brave, baby." She looked up, eyes clear. "I just told the truth." After that, everything moved fast. The jury came back in less than 4 hours. Guilty. On all counts: attempted murder, arson, conspiracy, insurance fraud. Malcolm was sentenced to 20 years, Loretta to 10. As the judge read the verdict, Malcolm turned once toward me, maybe to find a trace of the woman who used to love him. But I wasn't that woman anymore. I was the fire he thought would consume me. When we walked out of the courthouse, reporters swarmed. "Mrs. Ellis, how does it feel to see justice served?" I looked down at Nia, her small hand wrapped in mine. "It feels like breathing again," I said. 6 months after the verdict, spring painted Crescent Hills with new color. The dogwoods bloomed again, soft and white against skies that finally looked harmless. I had found us a small cottage outside Atlanta. 1 story, no smart locks, no polished illusions. Just sunlight through real windows and a front porch wide enough for 2 chairs and peace. At night, the crickets hummed where alarms once screamed. The air smelled like earth instead of fear. Nia loved the new place instantly. She claimed the smallest bedroom and filled it with paper cranes, crayons, and half-finished stories. "This one's about us," she said once, showing me a drawing of 3 figures standing under a big orange sun, me, her, and my father, smiling behind us. She'd written in shaky letters, "We made it out." I hung it above her bed. By day, I went back to work at the Crescent City Museum, this time with purpose sharper than pain. The exhibition on forgotten Black women architects had opened to standing ovations. But I wasn't done. I wanted to build something of my own. So I started a foundation, Blueprint Rising, a program that funded young Black girls who wanted to study architecture, design, and urban renewal, the kind of spaces that make people feel safe and seen. The name came to me one night while Nia slept beside me on the couch. My father's voice echoed in my memory. "Don't just rebuild the walls, baby girl. Rebuild the reason for them." That became my mission. My healing. Some evenings, Dr. Marcus Hill, the counselor who had been helping Nia process everything, would stop by for dinner. He never asked to stay. He just listened. He had that quiet strength of a man who knew how to wait. Eventually, waiting turned into belonging. One Saturday, while we all sat on the porch eating peach cobbler, Nia turned to him and asked, "Are you family now?" He smiled and looked at me before answering. "If your mama says so." I laughed softly. "He's part of it, baby. Real family isn't what you're born into. It's what holds you when everything else falls apart." That night, after Nia went to bed, Marcus and I sat in the dim glow of the porch light. The cicadas buzzed in rhythm, and I finally said what had been building for months. For a long time, I thought surviving was the end of the story. But it's just the start, isn't it? He nodded. Survival is the beginning of building something honest. I exhaled, the kind of breath that feels like the first one you've ever taken. Christmas came around faster than I expected. We decorated a small tree, strung with handmade ornaments and construction paper stars. Snow fell softly that night, rare for Georgia. Nia curled against me on the couch, her rabbit tucked under her chin. "Mommy," she whispered, half asleep. "We're safe now, right?" "Yes, baby. We're safe." She paused. "I think Grandpa helped." I smiled through tears. Maybe he did. Outside, the world was still. Inside, the fire crackled, not the kind that destroys, but the kind that warms. For the first time in years, I wasn't looking over my shoulder. I was looking forward. I learned that healing doesn't erase the past. It gives it shape. It teaches you to trust your own instincts, to listen when something feels wrong, and to fight even when you're tired. Nia had been my reason to survive. Now she was my reason to thrive. So to anyone who ever finds themselves in the dark, I'll tell you this. Trust the whisper inside you that says run, or stay, or fight. It's not fear, it's wisdom. Because sometimes survival isn't about escaping the fire. It's about becoming it. Every storm leaves behind something, ashes, scars, and if you're lucky, truth. What happened in Crescent Hills wasn't just about betrayal or survival. It was about rebirth. Because when you lose everything that once defined you, you finally get to decide who you truly are. I rebuilt from nothing but courage, a child's love, and the memory of those who believed in me. And now, every sunrise that touches this little house feels like a second chance, proof that the fire didn't end me. It refined me. If this story reached you, if it reminded you that no matter how deep the hurt, there's always a way back to light, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who might need to remember their own strength. Drop a comment about the moment you decided to rise again. Like this story if you believe in rebuilding from pain. And make sure to subscribe to Revenge Tales by Camera for more stories of resilience, betrayal, and redemption, where every ending sparks a new beginning. Because sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't destruction, it's becoming unbreakable.